7. The author is not the only person who has remarked a strange form that frequently recurs in speeches of the Reverend Fathers of the Secret Conference, namely those harangues to imaginary auditors, of which they almost all present specimens or fragments in their addresses to their colleagues. There are some to whom this form seems extraordinary and unnatural. Extraordinary that the author own it is, but as to its being unnatural, the circumstances and the men considered, the author was quite of the opposite opinion. Men who for 15, 20 or 30 years more or less have been in the daily practice of public speaking, whose incessant task is proselytism, the seduction of conscience, the propagation of their policy, the conquest of souls, and who, when met together to concert and mutually make known their means of action and their modes of proceeding, are glad to display each his own individual skill. Such men would naturally have recourse to the form of communication in question. On reflection, then, it is evident that this singularity is perfectly natural in a special case. In which it occurs. The more improbable it seems in an abstract point of view, the more strongly does it argue in favour of the authenticity of the conference. For most assuredly, the idea of putting all those numerous harangues into the mouths of the Reverend Fathers would never have occurred spontaneously to one who should have sat down to compose a fiction. The thing is one of those which we can account for when they are done, but which we can hardly imagine beforehand. Leone himself had never, so far as the author was aware, given the explanation of the matter which to the author appeared so simple. The answer that he heard him return to objections of this kind had always been, I can only say that the thing was so. 8. It certainly cannot be said that there are not, in the preliminary narrative or in the conference itself, points as to which Leone had clearly perceived the difficulty of overcoming public incredulity. He had even debated with himself whether he should not suppress certain passages of the conference, knowing very well that they would prove stumbling blocks, and that many persons refusing to believe them might very probably reject all the rest along with them. Finally, he resolved to set down everything he had heard with the most scrupulous fidelity, and in the author's opinion, the has herein done wisely. Notwithstanding the inconveniences resulting from such a course. Sound critics will see in the fact an additional evidence of truth. They will say to themselves that were Leone as author instead of a narrator, he would have taken good care not to leave in the work, not hastily put forth matters which he must have been well aware would appear incredible. In like manner, if a story of the circumstances by which the secret conference was disclosed to him were a fiction, would it not have been very easy to make that fiction more probable? Tale for tale, there might have been devised a score that on the whole would have been much simpler and would have presented much fewer of those apparent difficulties on which common objectors tenaciously fasten. No, and as Leone is far from being a fool, the author says, and for proof, he might appeal to circumstances, such as the daring resolution he adopted at the very moment when he had been panic-stricken by a danger that still hung over him, and which he himself describes to satiety. The almost literally exact stenography of the conference, the accumulation in so brief a space of time of the two revelations, that of the secret books in the library, and that of the speeches of the Reverend Fathers, and so forth and so forth. The author says, for his part, instead of the veracity of the story being impugned by its improbability, that very improbability is a pledge of veracity. 9. The author concludes with an observation. Leone gives with exact details the narrative of his own life at the periods which have reference to the event of which he speaks. It is incontestable that he entered the monastery of Chieri with an extremely ardent, fixed, and profound determination, that he desired nothing so much as to become a Jesuit, that hopes had already been held out to him which could not but have whetted his desires, and that all at once, without any ascertained motive, he was seen, to the great amazement of everybody, flying from that monastery into which he had so eagerly desired admittance 2 months before, and where he had met with nothing but kindness, favour, and all sorts of winning treatment. It is certain then that he received some terrible shock in the monastery. The fact is attested by his flight, his subsequent illness, and his sudden abandonment of that Jesuit career which had been so much the object of his ambition, while at the same time he did not quit the clerical profession. This mysterious revolution, the meaning of which he could not then explain to anyone of his friends or relations, and of which his old mother, who then lived in Paris, did not know the cause until the death of the head of the family, allowed Leone to quit Piedmont. This revolution was certainly the effect of some extraordinary and formidable adventure, some sudden revelation, some appalling burst of light. For him whom it had befallen, it was decisive of the whole bent of his life, and made the study of all that pertains to Jesuitism thenceforth his principal occupation. And fine, the facts relating to all the circumstances which form in the narrative the envelope. I wonder if that's an old English word, in fine. Not too sure on that one. In fine, the facts relating to all the circumstances which forms in the narrative the envelope, as it were, to the secret conference, are of public notoriety in Leone's native land, and he narrates them publicly, mentioning names, places, dates, facts, and persons. Something most extraordinary, unknown to the Jesuits themselves, who were unable to account for his flight, must have perturbed his being, altered his health, and effected a total change in the bent of his mind and his ideas. And for the author's part, he doubted not that the publication made by Leone was a true and sincere explanation of that mysterious point. 10. The author now will not say a word as to his cooperation in Leone's publication, because independently of what he had already made known, the author had made known, there was in this matter a circumstance which had strongly corroborated his conviction. Leone as yet writes French but very imperfectly, so that the author had been obliged to revise his whole manuscript pen in hand before sending it to press. Then he found an enormous difference as to style between the second part and the others. In the secret conference, Leone was supported by the text, and often by the solidity of the speeches which he had only to translate, and here he left the author hardly anything to correct, wherever there was any awkwardness or ambiguity of expression. The author had only to turn to the Italian text and find a more exact translation for the passage. In this part of the work, his French manuscript had only undergone slight modifications in a few passages. In the other two parts, the first especially, for the third consisted chiefly of extracts, the author had much more to do than he could have wished, and frequently whole pages to rewrite completely. The difference was so marked that it was impossible for the author to retain the least doubt as to the duality of the sources whence it arose, and notwithstanding their conjoint labour, there still remained such a discrepancy between Leone's style and that of the secret conference, that the least observant reader will easily recognise a diversity of origin. As an example, the author will particularly invite attention to the reflection with which Leone closes the conference, and which begins thus, see end of the second part, By these words, the echo and confirmation of others not less presumptuous. When we came to this passage in the course of their revision, Leone said to the author, "Is it worthwhile, think you, to let that reflection stand?" "By all means, my dear friend," the author replied with a smile. "Let it stand. We must not think of suppressing this precious, naive reflection with which you, as a narrator, have quite naturally closed your report of the conference. There is, if you will allow me, the author, to say so, between your summing up and that of the President, paragraphs 19 and 21, which precedes it, so enormous, so colossal a difference, that the author states here he knew no more glaring proof of the authenticity of the conference and of the impossibility of your being its author, to Leone. How pale and weak is what you say in comparison with the language of the general of the order. How much does the expression of your sentiments on Jesuit ambition sink below the word of the company, the living incarnation of that ambition? The contrast seems to me, the author, in this case, so important, that far from suppressing your lines, you must forthwith grant the author permission to repeat to the reader what I've just been saying to you. Him to Leone. And indeed, whoever compares the grandiloquent language of paragraph 19 and the concluding words of paragraph 21 with Leone's final reflection will, the author thought at this time, admit him with the latter is merely a narrator, and will own how far external passions, if the author may be allowed the expression, he's asking that, fall short of eternal passion in the expression of a sentiment, to body forth the theocratic will and purpose with those traits of fire that flash every moment from the pen of the maestre and often from the lips of the fathers of the secret conference. The writer must himself have raised an altar to theocracy in his soul and have long kept up upon that inward altar the sombre fire its worship demands. Although it does not always show with equal brilliancy throughout the conference, every attentive critic will easily distinguish the language of the initiated from that of ordinary men. (11) Here the author asks, let him recapitulate. In this affair he has examined the elements of the cause like a juror, somebody in a court. The character of the witness, his scrutiny into the circumstances of a story, and his study of the subject in itself have left no doubt upon his mind as to the authenticity of the revelation, and he here declared on his soul and conscience that he believes Leone to be perfectly faithful and sincere. He's not trying to pull a fast one. Now, whereas the author should deem it odious to make use, even against Jesuitism, of fraud and calumny, he has held it no less obligatory upon himself in the actual state of things, convinced as he was of the reality of the Jesuit plan, to assist Leone, who had been unable to find a publisher, in laying it before the public. This seemed to the author a personal and conscientious duty. When he came to the determination to edit the manuscript, the Jesuits were exhibiting in Switzerland what they were capable of. They tried every means to bring about there an intervention of the anti-liberal powers, a coalition into which the French government monstrously entered. Instead of conjuring civil war by a voluntary retreat, those pretended disciples of Jesus were seen artfully kindling the fanaticism and rancour of the abused populations of the Sonderbund, and doing all in their power to provoke a bloody conflict. Their aim was to recover, by means of an intervention, the grounds taken from them in the cantons and the Diet by the progress of free ideas. They spared no effort to produce that odious result which happily they failed to accomplish. Moreover, it was well known what had been and what was still the parts played by them in Rome and what a weighty obstacle they were to the liberal intentions of the great pontiff, who at every step in advance encountered the occult and potent influence. The publication of the secret plan would serve to unmask them. Their whole strength consisted in the mystery in which they showed themselves. Let their projects be exposed to daylight, and the charm will be broken. These darksome and malignant associations are likely the phantoms of the night that vanish the moment they are touched by one ray of sunshine. Probably like a vampire, and the sun hits it, turns to dust. The author has said wherefore and how he came to take up upon himself the editing of this book, although certain of Leone's tendencies are not always perfectly in accordance with the author's. The main thing for the author in this matter had been to aid in unveiling that odious conspiracy in which many still hesitate to believe, and he owned that he was for a long time among the number. He's admitting that he was doubtful as well, which has for its defined and specific end the re-establishment of darkness and despotism, and for its means the deliberate and conscious employment of the most abominable of lies, religious lying. Those who may refuse to consider the secret conference as anything but a romance cannot at least deny that the romance is perfectly historical. The third part contains an assemblage of proofs putting this point beyond all cavil. The gospel is the code of human freedom and dignity. Some would make it a code of brutification and slavery, or rather they would stifle the rays of light and love that beam from it, and substitute a despicable fanaticism for the spiritual and democratic religion of Jesus. They will not succeed in their design, but to ensure the defeat of the theocratic conspiracy, the friends of progress and freedom must bestir themselves. Catholicism is a great religious institution. This is according to the author. It is necessary to the development of that living institution that the hierarchy which governs it be renovated and retempered in the living sources of the gospel. So what he's actually saying is the global religion, that which is universal or global, may not be specifically pointing to the Roman Catholic. But then again, it could be. The first steps which the pontiff, Catholicism is a great religious institution. It is necessary to the development of that living institution that the hierarchy which governs it be renovated and retempered in the living sources of the gospel. The first steps which the pontiff, who now wears the tiara, has made in the way of progress and liberty are a capital revelation for Catholicism. So he is talking about the Roman Catholic Church. To be or not to be, Christianity is immortal, a religion which is summed up in these words: love one another and love God above all things, cannot die out from mankind, for every progress of humanity is but a new and fuller unfolding within it of Christianity, that is to say, of love and liberty. But the future destiny of the Catholic institution, which is a government, now depends, like that of all other governments, on its reconciliation with the spirit of the gospel, which is the spirit of humanity. The Catholic government is still aristocratic and despotic. Let it emancipate its serfs. Let it recognise the rights of the secondary clergy and guarantee them. Let it put itself in harmony with the sentiments of the primitive church and strive to free the world instead of employing itself in the old work of oppression. Christianity is young and radiant at that particular time. Theocracy is decrepit. Let Roman Catholicism choose between the two. Any long delay would be perilous. The Jesuits are the janissaries of theocratic Catholicism. Janissaries of theocratic Catholicism. The Pope of Islam has perhaps shown the Catholic Pope in what ways a serious reform could be begun. London, January 27th, 1848. Victor Considérant, the editor, publisher, member of the General Council of the Signer. So when he says Pope of Islam, he actually probably means a caliphate or caliph. P.S. Paris, May 28th, 1848. Since the author wrote the above, This writer wrote the above preface to Leone's narrative in London, and at the moment when the work was about to appear simultaneously in England, France, Belgium and Germany, the Revolution of February changed the face of things. The party of oppression, favoured by the impious alliance of the French government with the absolute courts, had been miraculously overthrown. The Jesuits themselves had been expelled from Rome. Let us not be deceived, however, the battle was not won. Peace and liberty were still far from being solidly established in the world at that particular time. Peace, liberty, complete reciprocity, solidarity, and universal brotherhood will only be realised by the definitive incarnation of the spirit of the gospel in humanity. The work now before us is to make a democratic and Christian Europe, instead of the aristocratic and socially speaking heathen Europe which was yesterday official and legal. The Christian is far more religious and social than political. It is the era, or was the era, of practical Christianity which they called on to inaugurate. Hence, though Leone's publication now no longer possesses the character, it would have had in the very heat of the strife before the Revolution, it nevertheless retained its value. It would serve the good cause by exposing the designs of the bad cause. It would help the development of the true Christianity, democratic Christianity, by exhibiting in its odious nakedness the pseudo-Christianity, or this fake Christianity, falsified Christianity, the Christianity of the profit seekers, of theocracy, of despotism. The two parties must be accurately segregated, on the one side daylight, on the other side darkness. The subordinate clergy, whose condition in France was an actual civil, political and religious thraldom, had respired the era of freedom with hope and love. Let the Republic give it a democratic constitution. Let it restore to it the rights and guarantee of which it cannot be much longer despoiled, and it will soon have made its conquest. The subordinate clergy begs only to be released from the yoke. It groans beneath superiors who are imposed upon it, and whom it fears, whereas it ought to elect and love them. Let us emancipate the sacerdotal people, set it free, and the oppressive and shameful doctrines of Jesuitism will find in it their most formidable antagonist. It is time that this be done. This is what the author is saying of that particular moment in that era. It is time that this be done. It is time that the ecclesiastical people communicate with the lay people, so these priests, etc., those high-ups in the church, or those of the church, should communicate with the ordinary person, the commoner, in the sentiments of modern life and modern ideas. It is idle now to think of conserving dead interpretations. Society is athirst for liberty, equality and fraternity. It is time to return to the holy source and recover the liberating import of Christianity. Providence had committed an august mission to the church to perpetuate Christ's teachings, to render him forever living on earth, previously to preserve and to realize daily more and more the gospel principles of unity, charity and universal brotherhood. Instead of accomplishing this task, the theocratic spirit has striven to efface from the church the traces of him who has founded it, to filch away the liberal meaning of his instructions, to paralyze the intellectual life, and in a word, to make mankind a flock of brutes, to be shorn by the princes of the church and the princes of the world. Disowned, let us hope, by the mass of the clergy, this theocratic spirit will soon be constrained, finally and forever, to give up Europe to the genius of the new times, reconciled with the most sacred traditions of humanity. The moment has come for the church to repudiate all fellowship with a sect which has led it astray from its proper path, and to regain the ground it has lost in the confidence of men by actively furthering all truly Christian works, that is to say, all works of social and intellectual amelioration. The Revolution of February had opened a magnificent field for the church. The problem was to be solved in the constitution of a Christian society. For 1800 years has Christianity been preached to men. How to incarnate it in society was now the problem. Political society itself invoked the gospel formula, taking for its motto these three Christian words: liberty, equality and fraternity. Let the subordinate clergy and the liberal bishops, casting off the anti-Christian and anti-Catholic traditions of Jesuitism, press forward for the faith, hope and love in the path which is open to them. The mission of true Christianity is now to be found universal democracy. The Pope has expelled the Jesuits at that particular time. It remains for him to reinstall the papacy in its spiritual and Catholic functions by abdicating all temporal authority. It is its temporal interests that have corrupted the Church. So long as the head of the Church shall remain king of the Roman states, the Catholic Church will be nothing but a Roman oligarchy. It must again become a spiritual and universal democracy, and its general councils must proclaim to the earth the true sense, the liberating and emancipating sense of the Scriptures. A sincere return to the democratic spirit of the gospel, a rupture of that simonical alliance which odiously perverted a religion of freedom and fraternity, making it into a yoke of oppression for the benefit of all who use up nations for their own profit. A formal repudiation of the feudal, theocratic, obscurantist and Jesuitical spirit, such as the price at which the salvation of the Catholic institution is to be secured. V.C. PPS, July 10th, 1848. Events follow up upon each other with such rapidity that every day produces in manner a new situation. The day after the Revolution of February, the Republic was accepted by all in France. Louis Philippe left behind him neither affection, nor esteem, nor roots of any sort. Rejoicing in his fall, the Legitimists said to themselves that the time of monarchies was past, and gave in their adhesion on all sides to the Republican principle, the government of all, by all, and for all. The grand and vast idea of universal union found in the language of Lamartine an utterance full of brilliancy, elevation, and authority. Unfortunately, narrow categories, language of injudicious violence and conquerors' ears, calculated to lead to the belief that the immense majority of the French citizens who were Republicans of the morrow were about to be governed as conquered populations by the Republicans of the eve. All those violences of speech and demeanour, which had not even the logic of the strong hand in their favour, produced serious reactionary ferments in the country.